Somehow, I'm still alive.
In the past few years, Resident Evil has seen a very substantial resurgence, with the recent game selling millions of copies and receiving critical acclaim. Most importantly, the remakes. During this resurgence, Capcom has released 3 remakes of their original classics, RE2, RE3, and RE4. These games acted as a starting point, allowing thousands of new fans to flood into the series and experience it from the start. Among these new age Resident Evil fans is me. I cautiously grabbed myself a copy of RE2 Remake and there was no turning back. I've been all over this series, from Remake to Village to only a couple of spin-offs because not to be picky, but Resident Evil Gaiden for the Game Boy Color doesn't look very good. I fell in love with this series, how couldn't I? In Resident Evil, a beautiful woman in a wetsuit can fight off monsters from hell with wrestling moves, and it's completely normal. It's because of this that the Queen of England was a huge Resident Evil fan and publicly endorsed it multiple times. That's a fact, look it up. She was buried with a copy of 6, which I've also played.
I just shot the president.
And now, years since I first stepped into the RPD, I'm proud to call myself a Resident Evil fan. Except, something kinda bugged me. I'd say that I've played every mainline Resi game from 1 to 8, but that's technically not true. For RE1, 2, and 3, I'd only ever played the remakes. Which isn't really a problem, I figured it's safe to assume the remakes are the superior versions, but it made me feel my journey was somehow incomplete. Did I really know Resident Evil if I hadn't seen where it all began? Then, I was browsing the barren wasteland that is the PS3 store, and I saw it. The Resident Evil Original Trilogy. I made my purchase, excited to hop in and see where it all began, and I figured I might as well take you with me and review them, one by one, to show all the new fans what these games are like, how they hold up, and how I feel about them as a new age Resident Evil fan. That sound good? Let's hop in. We start off with Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. This is a bit odd, I know, I'm reviewing a trilogy, 1, 2, and 3, why am I starting with 3? Well see, I'm doing this in a worst to best kind of way. I don't think 3 is the worst game, absolutely not, but RE1 is such a big deal, the original Resident Evil, the game that started a franchise, and so I'd much rather build up to and end on that. But also, RE3 is the underdog. Whenever I hear people talk about these originals, it always goes like this. RE1 is a classic and the game that started it all, RE2 is the second coming of Christ, and RE3 is the other one. People don't hate it, in fact a lot of people will tell you it's their favorite, but for every one of them, there's 2 others that think it's just meh. Funnily enough, that's not far off how people feel about the remake. The Resident Evil remakes are all fantastic except for RE3, which is both too short and too shallow. It feels more like a DLC than a full game. And fans of the original RE3 hate it for failing to honor the original. Before I played the original, I was simply underwhelmed by the remake. Now that I have played the original, the remake actively pisses me off, because this is a fantastic game. Jill Valentine's Last Escape is both absolutely not her last escape and just good fun. Fighting all manner of biohazards, slipping through the grasp of Nemesis, while walking through the haunting streets and landmarks of Raccoon City. Which, for the first time, feels fully realized. That's what struck me most about this game, was how real Raccoon City felt. Still a dumb name, by the way. I know this is ironic, but it felt alive. The flickering of a neon sign, signs everywhere beckoning you into stores that are now closed. The lights left on in a bar because someone thought they'd be coming back. Cars abandoned outside a gas station, broken glass everywhere, the dimly lit clock tower, the trashed waiting room at the hospital, the looming green trees of the park, and the sound of it all. Raccoon City is so quiet. Arguably far too quiet to be realistic, but it feels right. You can stand there, and you'll hear the wind blowing between the buildings. It doesn't sound dissimilar to something groaning in the distance. You can hear a shell casing drop, and the different footsteps you make depending on what you're stepping on. You listen for the cries and gunshots of other survivors, but there's nothing. You're alone in a dead city. I still remember stepping out of the hospital and hearing the rain. And I just felt it. You know what I mean? Like I was there. I know it's funny, but these low-res backdrops and simple sounds immersed me in this world in a way I never have been before. And for all my gripes with this camera system, I'm not sure it could have been done without it. The way the camera positions itself, far back and up high, looking in on Jill through the city, it makes you feel the scale of this place. It makes you feel so small. Speaking of the camera, how's the gameplay? Well, it's outdated, shocker I know. This is a tricky part to critique because, of course the game is outdated, it came out in 1999, it's older than me, it's probably older than you. Though honestly, I think this works to its credit. Yeah, by today's standards it's outdated, but for a game from 1999, it holds up remarkably well. I think the fact that I, a modern age gamer, can play through it from start to finish with little to no hiccups deserves praise in and of itself. Look at something like Hitman Silent Assassin, that's a game from 2002 and it's borderline unplayable. So yeah, it doesn't play fantastic, but we all knew that, and the fact that it's still fun to play even now deserves some goddamn respect. Though I do want to go a little bit in depth. The game has no normal difficulty, you play on easy or hard, and I've got to give the game credit, it's always nice to see an easy mode that's genuinely easy. I was swimming in health and ammo the whole game. By the end I had over 200 rounds for the grenade launcher, my Jill Valentine was effectively the Terminator. And I know I just gave the game a pass for being outdated, but not all problems can be excused by age. I frequently found myself stun-locked, and near infinite ammo is pretty useless when you can't pull the trigger. Not to mention, Jill's auto-aim sucks. A lot of enemies quickly jump around, ending up behind you, so you need to release and reactivate the aim button to lock onto them, but Jill takes so long to lower and raise the weapon that they've always got another hit in before you can shoot, and manual turning is even slower. Overall, the puzzles were pretty fun, except for the water sample puzzle, which has no place here. I figured out how it worked pretty quickly, but even then it was a pain to actually solve, and that's not how puzzles should work. And for the love of God, stop making me confirm shit. Every time you go to save with the typewriter, there's 3 messages. This is a typewriter. You can save with the typewriter. Do you want to save with the typewriter? You need to press the X button to close each of these messages. It does this every single time. I saved 27 times in this game, and I knew how the typewriter worked the first fucking time. Just take me to the save menu. Why do I need to check off a mini shopping list every time I want to save my game? Not to mention the puzzles. Every time you want to make a new input, the game says, would you like to make a new input? Yeah, Ben Shapiro, that's why I'm doing the fucking puzzle. Oh, that was a voice crack, I shouldn't do that. Yeah, I'm overreacting, you start blanking this stuff out almost immediately, but still, what the fuck? I refuse to believe this is justified. What, do they need more time to load the save menu? Yeah! Okay, let's talk story. Resident Evil 3 Nemesis follows series veteran Jill Valentine as she attempts to escape the virus outbreak in Raccoon City, while being hunted by a bioweapon known as Nemesis. Overall, a pretty standard Resident Evil narrative. It provides a reason for stuff to happen and leaves no lasting impact. The characters aren't that exciting. Carlos is just lame, and one of the few things I can confidently say the remake did better.
It's alright, you're going ahead. I'm not gonna die on you, leave you in a cold, cruel, Carlosless world.
God, he's cool. Nikolai is completely forgettable and feels shoehorned in for the sake of having more villains. Seriously, someone in the writer's room must have said, guys, the abomination in a trench coat isn't scary enough, what do we do? And then someone chimes in, oh, I know, add a Russian. Nice job, Capcom, very topical. And Miss Valentine herself is about as interesting as, well, a Resident Evil protagonist. Her costume, on the other hand, is fascinating. She planned for this, right? There's this little image showing that she's preparing to walk out into the apocalypse, which means that she chose this outfit. Now, the tube top, mini skirt, and thigh-high boots are all bad enough, but I think by far the funniest part of this outfit is that fucking jumper wrapped around her waist. Picture this, right? Jill's got her guns loaded, she's about to step out into the apocalypse. She looks in the mirror and checks out her outfit. She sees tube top, miniskirt, thigh highs, and she thinks to herself, it's nice, but I might be chilly later.
We were only required to collect live data from the subjects.
These old school Resi games are infamous for their acting, but for the most part the performances here are just fine. They aren't great, but they're also inoffensive, get the job done, and breathe some life into this thing when necessary. The outlier is Jill Valentine, who is being played by a lady called Catherine Disher. Now, I actually think she's quite good.
I'm sorry about your daughter, but there isn't gonna be any rescue. We have to get out of here.
She displays emotion, agency, and you can tell she's trying to put some nuance in there, which certainly isn't helped by the fact that these cutscenes are about as elegant as a Barbie orgy, but still, good on her for putting some effort into a medium most actors still don't take seriously. Speaking of the cutscenes, the majority of the time cutscenes are like this, in-engine with the characters just standing around and vaguely emoting, but for all the major narrative beats, we get some lovely pre-rendered cutscenes. See kids, this is from old times, back when cutscenes actually looked better than the main game, as opposed to now, where they look worse. Yeah, I prefer pre-rendered cutscenes. Exactly what the fuck are you gonna do about it, huh? You gonna fight me? You're gonna come over here, I'm gonna be ready, we're gonna fight, and I'm gonna win. You wanna know why? You wanna know why I'm gonna win? Because I pre-rendered the fight, baby. I was on a beach in fucking Hawaii the whole time, and I won through the power of pre-rendered cutscenes, you fool. But seriously, these cutscenes don't happen very often, probably because they were very expensive, so it's always jarring when they pop up, and while obviously they do look better than the game, it doesn't really feel like it. This is from the era where CGI was uncomfortably smooth. It's not really a problem, but these do have some funny moments. Classic, the American woman doesn't know what uncircumcised looks like. At the end of the game, we get a cutscene of Jill and Carlos escaping the city, and just before a missile hits, Carlos does this.
It's time to go.
It's such a simple animation, but I find the way he looks down at his watch so funny, because it makes it seem like their departure is in fact scheduled, and not related to the fucking nuke that's about to drop in their vicinity, as if he could have looked at his watch and said, actually, we've still got 10 minutes. But what is without a doubt the funniest of these cutscenes occurs about halfway through the game. Jill has just called a rescue chopper, this night of horror is over, and they try really hard to make you think the game is about to end. This whimsical music is playing and Jill's so happy.
It's finally over. Huh? No!
just the way it's cut with the sound and everything. This cutscene put me out of commission for about a minute. Another thing the story has is narrative choices. At preset moments in the game, Jill will find herself in a particularly sticky situation she needs to escape, and two options will flash on the screen. You need to make a split-second decision between the two to decide how Jill will overcome the threat. It's akin to Telltale games, where your decision can change the story moving forward, and much like Telltale games, your decision doesn't change shit. Wow, my choice can change whether Carlos meets expendable black guy or not? Wow, my choice can determine what end of the clock tower I enter from? Wow, Nikolai can live or die? Is this feature a sledgehammer? Because it's fucking groundbreaking. Sorry, I'm being facetious. It is a cool idea and it keeps things fresh. The problem is you don't actually know what you're choosing. Look at this. Nemesis is here. Am I gonna use the light or the cable? I choose the cable, Jill throws the cable in a puddle, electrocuting Nemesis. I didn't know that was gonna happen. I had no frame of reference for what either of these choices meant, let alone how it would affect the story. They're all like this, which means you can't make educated decisions, you're just making a random 50-50 choice with no clue what the ramifications will be, which makes the whole thing feel kind of tacked on. One of the things that I was most excited about hopping into this was the new environments. In Remake, about half of the content from the original was cut, that being the clock tower and the park. And having now played the original, I can confidently tell you they cut the best parts of the game. The clock tower is this ominous figure. It's dark, it's gothic, it's old school. It's effectively an homage to the Spencer Mansion where this all started. That's good because it gives you that Resident Evil feel, the slow burn gothic horror that makes you think, yeah, this is Resident Evil. And the park is just as good. You spend most of this game in city streets and public spaces. You'll gain a sense of familiarity with the format, so when you step through that gate into the wilderness of the park with overhanging trees, zombies climbing out of the ground, which now that I think about it doesn't make that much sense how they get infected, rickety structures and hidden paths, you're out of your element and it really shakes up the experience. And of course, I can't talk about this game without talking about that amazing safe room theme. Resident Evil has so many fantastic safe room themes, and out of them all, this has to be the most overtly sinister. These loud thuds like the footsteps of the Nemesis closing in on you, and this uplifting melody comes in. It sounds more hopeful before being suppressed by the loud thuds of the Nemesis. Each note like the ticking of a clock counting down for a city that is running out of time. It's just such a good theme, and it suits this game so well, because this game is amazing. This game is better than its remake, and I highly recommend it. Okay, moving on. Resident Evil 2 is a big one, for a few reasons. For one, RE2 Remake was my first Resi game, and I love it. It's the reason I'm here now, playing a bunch of games from the 90s. For two, RE2 is a very beloved title. Even now, after all these years, a lot of people still regard it as one of the best Resident Evil games, and some even say it's better than the remake. A claim I'm a bit skeptical of. My guess is that's nostalgia talking, but I could be wrong, and there's only one way to find out. For the dozenth time, I step into the shoes of rookie cop Leon the Sex Kennedy on his less than amazing first day at the RPD. Now, one thing that became quickly apparent is that I may have shot myself in the foot by starting with RE3. While it is the underdog of the trilogy, it's also the most modern, which means it learned from the mistakes of the previous entries. The fixed camera is utilized in all the older Resi titles. It's not ideal and it has multiple drawbacks, but the games have some quality of life features to make the whole thing less egregious. Namely, auto-aim, which is very useful when you have to shoot at enemies that you can't see, and the 180 quick turn, which is absolutely imperative when controlling a character that literally moves like a tank. RE2 has neither of these benefits, and you will feel the pain of their absence immediately. The quick turn was so important for tackling the clunkiness of tank controls. It not only helped with escaping threats, but just moving in general. Without it, the only way to make a 180 turn is to rotate on the spot, which is so much slower and really screws you over in combat. As for the lack of auto-aim, oh baby. You've made it this far, you probably know the deal with the fixed camera. The lack of a 3D environment makes it impossible to aim down the sights of a weapon. That is the only real downside of the second-person camera style, but it's one hell of a downside. Every time you play one of these games, there's this fantastic atmosphere that really engrosses you in the game, and it's amazing, but the second you have to fight anything, all that good stuff flies out the window, and you're suddenly reminded that the game you're playing is really old. As in, came out on the Sega Dreamcast pre-9/11, we don't use that word anymore, Grandad. Levels are old. The combat is a chore, and it takes the fun out of the game. That's where auto-aim comes in. With the simple addition of a lock-on aim system, the combat goes from actively ruining the experience to simply being not fun. Which doesn't sound like much of an upgrade, but believe me, it's better to be middle of the road than outright bad. So yeah, Resident Evil 2 does not have auto-aim. You have to manually rotate Leon in the direction of a threat before pulling the trigger. Ultimately, the game is still pretty forgiving in this regard, as pinpoint accuracy is not required. You can just aim in an enemy's general vicinity and you'll hit your shots. Though this does not excuse the fixed camera's top offender, that being enemies that you can't fucking see. That's a thing in these games. Enemies that you cannot see. Your character will be looking across the room at an incoming threat, but you can't see it because it's not in the fucking frame. This has always been an annoyance, but with auto-aim, at least it's not a problem. Again, we do not have auto-aim. I mean, come on, I'm assuming RE1 also does not have auto-aim, so how didn't you learn from that game? It's not a technical limitation, these games are all on the same devices, so I guess it just took them a minute to figure it out. And again, it's not a huge problem, it can't be, because you can still finish the game, but is that really worth celebrating? I don't think it is. In spite of some bullshit, the game still functions. Woo! Yeah! Let's fucking go, come on now. Manually aiming at a target you cannot see is about as much fun as it sounds. As I mentioned before, the aim is pretty generous, but it's not that generous, so shooting into the void is best done when aiming down narrow hallways, as it's the only time you can be sure of a hit. Or you can wait for an enemy to get in frame, which will make for an easier hit for you, but also for them. Honestly, I never really felt confident in the combat for this game. I had a couple of instances where I thought I'd lined up my shot quite nicely, only to completely miss the mark. I mean, obviously depth is a little bit of an issue when you're effectively a Lego man standing in front of a JPEG, but again, auto-aim. So yeah, actually playing the game is not that great. It all functions, but ultimately it's an inferior version of an already archaic control system. Though, there's more to these games than just gameplay. Being a horror game, the atmosphere is very important. RE3 surprised me with just how atmospheric it was, and since RE2 came out only a year prior, its atmosphere should be pretty good too, right? Well, no. No, not really. The atmosphere isn't really here. Let's go from the start. The game starts with Leon making a dash through an apocalyptic Raccoon City, and in contrast to what I'm about to say for the rest of the game, this part does have a strong atmosphere. Matter of fact, it's the same atmosphere used in RE3, that eerie quiet with nothing but the sound of the wind. That atmosphere worked really well for RE3, but here it actually works against the game, because this is supposed to be hell on earth and a little bit of wind is not doing a good job conveying that. The idea is that the streets of Raccoon City are so chaotic that Leon and Claire are effectively trapped in the RPD. Since walking out the front door would be too dangerous, they're forced to go down this rabbit hole of monsters. But in this game, with the atmosphere these streets establish, I don't know why they don't walk out the front door. As soon as they realize Chris isn't at the RPD, there's really no reason for them to stay there. It certainly feels more dangerous than the outside. Not to mention, this game has heavy action, time to run music, and if you just played that over the opening, the problem would be fixed. The rest of the game will see you going through the RPD, the basement, the sewers, and the Umbrella Lab, and none of them really come to life. There's multiple reasons for this, but most crucial is the backdrops. As I just mentioned, RE3 came out only a year after RE2. That's not a lot of time for technological advancements, so how come the backdrops in this game look so much worse? Seriously, the main hall of the RPD is such an important place. It's the first thing you're gonna see, you're gonna cross through it a dozen times, so why the hell does it look like this? There's like 2 colors on screen right now, and for all I know, the zombies never even touched this place because there's fucking nothing in here. Not to mention, was this place designed for aliens? You need a safety ladder to reach the 2nd floor in the main hall of a police station. Who the fuck does that? Yeah, it's a video game, it's not meant to be ultra realistic, but it's also a horror game, and therefore, by design, it needs to immerse me, and right now, all I'm thinking about is whether this place was designed by the same architect that made the Spencer Mansion. A lot of the backdrops in this game feel bland because there's little to no set dressing, and as a result, nothing to really look at. There is the odd eye-catching frame here and there, like this one, which I found particularly striking. Not sure why, can't quite put my finger on it. They also look just a little bit flat, which, yes, obviously they are literally flat, but there's not quite the sense of depth that you'd feel in the other games. And I've got a couple reasons why that might be. For one, this game must be the predecessor to the early 2000s era of games, where the saturation was lower than the age of consent in Nigeria, because everything in this game is grey. And I mean everything. Police station, grey. Basement, grey. Sewers, grey. Though that one actually makes sense. Evil pharmaceutical lab, grey. And that one does not make sense. These places are always white because people need to know that the place is clean at all times. The zombie outbreak probably started because some biohazard mold was growing on the wall for a month and no one could tell because everything's grey. It is a horror game, I'm not asking for a rainbow, I'm just asking to be able to tell the difference between an office and an evil lair. The second problem with the backdrops is a huge contributor to this game's general lack of atmosphere, and it's the fact that everything in this game is too bright. And I don't mean that in the sense that the backdrops have been artificially brightened so we can see better, I mean that in the sense that the fucking lights are on. As in the office lights of the RPD are on. No power outage here, this place is a zombie beacon. It's not just a station either. The sewers have the same lights on. What kind of sewer is this well lit? The lab also has the lights on, but I figured that made sense. Okay, overall I did not find the game very immersive, and I think that's in large part due to the backdrops' lack of quality. Because the backdrops are the world that we inhabit. They need to be scary, they need to make turning a corner an intense experience. They need to give each location a sense of identity. They need to make us see the world and envision ourselves in it, but that stuff just isn't here. Every frame is lit better than a sitcom, and the color grading makes me think this game should have been called 50 Shades of Grey. That all said, this game is just a tiny bit immersive, and that's thanks to the soundtrack. There's some really good songs on here, especially the main hall theme, which, as you first step in, manages to give the RPD this haunting sense of identity, in spite of the backdrop not helping. And of course, there's the save theme. I love a good Resi save theme, and this one is no exception. It manages to provide you with a sense of comfort without letting you forget the danger that waits outside the room. That's just what these things are for. Though, I've always found this save theme a bit odd. Not in a bad way, I just get the sense that it's missing a key component. Like the ghostly howls in Safe Haven, the distortion in Serenity, or the jingle in A Moment of Relief. Not a problem, it's just an odd sense I get about this particular theme. So yeah, the game's soundtrack is pretty good, but I actually already knew that, because I purchased the DLC for the remake that allows you to play through with the original game's soundtrack. Let me tell you, I am not a fan of DLC for games that aren't free, but for £2.50 whatever it was, this is a worthy add-on. Not only does the new soundtrack freshen up the experience, I'd argue it's actually better in the remake. Because in this case it's actually enhanced by the pre-existing atmosphere, as opposed to before, when the soundtrack was doing all the heavy lifting. Not to mention, after playing the remake dozens of times, I can't remember a single song from that game's soundtrack, so I really recommend this add-on. It's the best of both worlds. So, how's the game's story? Well, I can't fully answer that question. To experience everything RE2 has to offer, you need to play through the game 4 times. Twice as Leon and twice as Claire. This is where we have the A-B scenarios. The idea of which effectively means that if you were to play Claire's A scenario, that would mean that she went through the station first and then you'd play Leon's B scenario, which would see him go in next and vice versa. The result is a few minor changes to the narrative, the items you find and the enemies you'll fight, though at its core the game remains the same. Now, I only had time for one playthrough, that being Leon's A scenario, which at least to my knowledge wasn't even a choice. I just started the game and I was Leon. So keep in mind that everything I'm about to say is from that one playthrough.
You told the city officials that you knew something about what's been going on, didn't you? What did you tell them?
Overall, the narrative was just fine, nothing outrageous and nothing jaw-dropping, which is exactly how I've always felt about it. Leon and Ada's relationship is still rushed, Leon and Claire still barely interact, though this time they actually meet face to face in the station, which falls into this series' familiar problem of, wait, so there's another person walking around this place and I just never run into them? As a fan of the remake, I was very disappointed by the absence of Martin. He is here, but he's got one short scene and he's been reduced to panic survivor who becomes a zombie. Another problem with the narrative is the lack of any real villainous presence. You may be surprised to learn that Mr. X is not in this game, at least not the first run-through. To my understanding, Mr. X only shows up in a B playthrough as a sort of curveball to shock players who thought they knew what to expect, which is a really fun idea, but it means that in terms of villains, the game relies exclusively on Birkin, and Birkin is barely in this. The first 2/3 of the game are spent building up to him, and then he gets about 2 boss fights, which means you don't really build up a rivalry with the guy, and as a result, the majority of the game is kind of tensionless. Speaking of Birkin boss fights, in the final boss fight you walk up to this lift. You push the button and you can see on these lights that the lift is making its way down to you. Then Birkin crashes through the ceiling and we've got a boss fight. Now, I thought this cutscene was clearly indicating to me that the lift was on its way, and sure enough, if you press the button during the fight, you'll be told that the lift isn't there yet, which means eventually it will be. Using this information, I determined that I did not have to fight Birkin, I just had to avoid him until the lift arrived. But no, the lift will only arrive if you kill Birkin. Even if you wait out the full timer, the lift will never arrive, which I think could have been better communicated.
Goodbye.
The acting is,
Ada!
it's not very good. Especially not Mr. Kennedy.
That can't be. I know her. Ada wouldn't do something like that.
Every now and then he'll have one line that makes you think, oh, that wasn't too bad. But for every one of those lines, there's 10 more that'll make you realize
What's going on in this town?
it was an accident. Not to mention, some of the shit these people say is completely bizarre.
You must be the new guy, Leon. Sorry, but it looks like your party has been cancelled.
But even if everyone was at the top of their game, they'd still be brought down by the ridiculously long pauses between lines, which can be really funny.
Now go. But just go.
There was one instance of this game that I found quite cool when I opened up a locker. In the locker was a machine gun. I went to pick up the machine gun and the game suggested I leave it for Claire. I found this really interesting because I understood what the game meant. As I mentioned, I only had time for one playthrough, but the game's proposing that if I played through Claire's B scenario, I could pick up the machine gun I had left for Claire during Leon's A scenario. And I think that's a really cool idea. As much as I love the remake, its A-B scenario stuff is incredibly weak, and this game's proposal that your choices in one playthrough could affect your next is a really exciting prospect. Okay, some quick thoughts, let's see. Whoever chose Ada's profile photo needs to be jailed. Seriously, what's the matter with you? This is the first Resi game to break the backdrop illusion for me. See? This zombie's arm is covering about 15 feet of wall right now. The indie British comedy series Spaced has an episode that starts with one of the characters so immersed in a video game that he's imagining himself killing zombies. When he's snapped back to reality, we see that the game he's playing is Resident Evil 2. Now that's pretty cool on its own, but creating this episode inspired the Spaced team to go on and create the film Shaun of the Dead. So we know for a fact that Resident Evil 2 had at least a tiny, teeny weeny, itsy bitsy helping hand in the creation of what is probably the best zombie film of all time. Also, Leon is such a pain to move around, not just because of the lack of quick turn. The environment's hitboxes are seemingly much bigger than necessary. You can't walk 5 feet in this game without getting snagged on some invisible corner. You'd think Leon was wearing a puffy dress and the station was lined with fishhooks. And that concludes the look at Resident Evil 2. Now, I was mostly negative on this. It has a lot of flaws and it wasn't a lot of fun to play, and it absolutely did not live up to the expectations. I thought it could have though, which, yeah, it's an old game, maybe I should have been more skeptical, but this is the same series that has Resident Evil 4. That's an old game and it's fully deserving of all the praise it gets, so when people told me this game was a masterpiece, I didn't think it sounded too far-fetched. Now look, obviously this game has its hiccups, because it came out in 1998. This game is 26 years old. Not only that, this is an early Resident Evil title. They were still in the learning stages with this. But one of the things that I liked so much about Resident Evil 3 was that its age was not a handicap. I could comfortably play that game. I could get lost in that world because there wasn't anything constantly reminding me that I was playing a relic of a video game. And I cannot say that for RE2, because you can really feel the age on this one. There's no atmosphere to draw you in, and simple movement and combat is a chore, and my impression was absolutely not helped by the fact that my expectations were way too fucking high. People absolutely adore this game. Even now they'll still tell you that it's better than its remake, it's the best Resi game, and it's one of the best games of all time. But it's just not. It's good, don't get me wrong, for a game from 1998, this is absolutely outstanding, but it's not this timeless masterpiece, this messiah of video games that everyone claims it to be. Look, I'm rustling feathers here, and I know that, but I'm not saying you shouldn't like the game. I'm not saying that you're an idiot for loving this game. Keep loving it, hold on to that, it's powerful stuff. I wish I loved this game. Fuck, I wish I loved everything. But I don't love this game, because my prior video game experiences make this seem really lame. I think the majority of the people that give this game such high praise do so because they played it when it was new, when it was revolutionary, and people, honest to God, found it scary. Because you played it at that time, under those circumstances, it was really special to you. You were in awe of this incredible new thing, the same way I was infatuated with the game's remake. And that's fantastic. Enjoy it. Let this game be special to you, but keep in mind that as the times have changed, it's not that special to people now. And while it may be your favorite, on a fundamental level, it is definitely not the best Resident Evil game. Okay? Cool. Moving on. Resident Evil 1 is a very important game. I don't hear it get a lot of love or anything, but it's the first Resident Evil game, the birth of the Resident Evil brand. This one game spawned 7 more mainline entries, a dozen spin-offs, 4 remakes, 11 movies, 2 TV shows, and multiple comics and novels. Resident Evil is a household name, which, as much as I hate to admit, is probably thanks to the Milla Jovovich films. But whatever the case, it all started here, because of this one game. Full disclosure, I am not expecting much from this game. Because, for one, it's the first attempt, and first attempts are where all the mistakes are. And for two, I've played the game's remake, which is widely regarded as the only video game remake that does absolutely everything better than its predecessor. So, to my understanding, the only thing this game has going for it is the fact that it started a billion-dollar franchise. But that's not all. This game has something amazing, something beautiful. Auto-aim. After playing through RE2, where lining up a shot took 3 to 4 business days, let me tell you, you'd think Jesus himself had come up behind me, put his hands on the controller, and whispered in my ear, "I'll take it from here, G." Because sweet lord was it good to have auto-aim back. It felt so good it distracted me from the clunky controls, even the lack of quick turn didn't bother me. So, why does this game have auto-aim? It came out before RE2, so what gives? Well, what I'm playing is not actually the original Resident Evil. What I'm playing is Resident Evil Director's Cut, which came out before RE2, so no, it doesn't answer that question. I still don't know what the fuck they were thinking, but anyway. The Director's Cut. A classic, the ugly child of rich people's egos. The Director's Cut was released a year after RE1's initial release to hold fans over while RE2 was being worked on. It included changes such as different music, altered censorship, and arranged mode, which would swap enemy locations to keep veterans on their toes, and of course, auto-aim. So I was effectively still playing the original game, just with some minor differences. It wasn't ideal, but I figured I'd simply have to figure out what was part of the original and what was part of the director's cut, and address accordingly. But that wasn't as easy as it sounded. You see, the more I tried to understand the differences between these two, the more confused I got, and in the end, well, I still don't really understand it. The game made it very clear I was playing the director's cut. It says it here, it says it there, and it says it there. One of the things I knew for sure about the director's cut was that it had a new soundtrack, which I wasn't looking forward to because from what I'd gathered, the new soundtrack was a significant downgrade, and I'd have to spend the game listening to bangers such as Mansion Basement. But then I played the game and quickly realized I had the original soundtrack. Which would suggest this is not the director's cut. But I also have auto-aim, which would suggest this is the director's cut. But I also couldn't find the arranged difficulty mode, which would suggest this isn't the director's cut. Ultimately, I gave up trying to understand the whole thing and chalked it up to regional differences, because those were a big thing back then, as opposed to now where it just makes blood look like cum. Anyway, how does this game play? Well, I thought it played pretty good, but that's probably influenced by the fact I'd come hot off the back of 2. The simple addition of auto-aim does wonders for the gameplay loop, and when you've been without it for a while, finding it again can make you feel like you've just discovered fire. Ultimately, the game plays just fine, it all functions, but there's still no quick turn. I did find that Jill got caught on considerably less janky hitboxes than Leon, so that was nice. I've got to say, I found this to be much more of a puzzle game than the next two. Combat encounters are brief and relatively sparse, and once you'd cleared an area, more often than not it would stay safe. This meant that the majority of my time at the Spencer estate was spent searching for key items to solve puzzles. Puzzles that I solved rapidly because I've played the remake. While not every puzzle from the remake is in this game, every puzzle from this game is in the remake. So if you've played the remake, which you should, it's very good, then the gameplay has very little to offer. Though all that running around does create a problem. RE1 has without a doubt the most backtracking of any Resi game, and I'd also argue that the Spencer Mansion has the most doors of any Resi environment. Now, I haven't mentioned this yet, but in all these old Resi games, going through a door will take you out of the game and show you a 3-second animation of the door opening in a void.
Editor here. I was wrong. The doors take 7 seconds to open. 7. With an S, and an E, and a V, and an N.
They do this for every single door, every single time you open it. This is done to allow time for the next area to load, which would have been necessary on the Sega fucking Saturn. It's not that bad. The reason I haven't mentioned it yet is that you get used to it pretty quick and don't even notice it. But you have to do a lot of backtracking in this game, and that's the thing. Backtracking. As in you've already been there. While it's obviously a loading screen, these doors are also meant to fill you with a sense of fear and suspense. You're supposed to be on the edge of your seat, watching that door open, worried about what's gonna be behind it. But even if this was 1996 and you were genuinely scared by this game, that doesn't change the fact that you do know what's behind the fucking door. You've been there like 3 times already. Most of the time you'll find a key piece of a puzzle and you'll have to backtrack to the other side of the mansion to use it, which will take you through about 5 doors. That's 15 seconds of doors opening just to make a tiny bit of progress. The whole game is like this. Find the thing, go for a bunch of doors to use the thing, which will help you find the new thing, and you've got to go for a bunch of doors to use the new thing. As I said, it does kind of slip into the subconscious, but the sheer quantity, god damn. You know, I actually have the exact same complaint about the remake. Though I guess even that does it better, because the doors are nicer to look at. Anyway, add it to the list of reasons why I think they should remake that game. Speaking of doors, let's talk about the Spencer estate. The spooky locale, the ambience, the atmosphere, the immersion. How is it? Well, don't get too excited, but the backdrops in this game are comprised of multiple colors. Woo! Hell yeah, come on now. Okay, but seriously, there is a much broader color palette, and the game benefits greatly from it. Different locations have different color schemes, which really helps to give them a better sense of identity and you a better sense of place and progression. This time around, only the underground lab is grey. The guardhouse is brown, which helps with the cabin lodge vibe that it's going for. The garden uses green on leaves and mossy stones. The cave is fucking hideous. And the mansion is consistent only in its inconsistency, creating an excitement as you never know what the next room will be like. A mood-setting dark red, cool blue, sickly green, filthy orange, posh white. There's definitely a variety, and sometimes the entrance to a room will hint at its color scheme, which I thought was a nice touch. Let me tell you, looking at this game, it may not be pretty, but at least it's not boring. Speaking of the game not looking pretty, I briefly criticized RE2 because some of its environments were too sparsely detailed. That's an even bigger problem here. The majority of large areas are completely barren, which never doesn't look odd. Most rooms are almost empty except for one or two pieces of furniture. Like RE2, there are some areas that are highly detailed, but they are the exception, not the rule. Honestly, I'd argue the inconsistency makes it worse, but that's not the only thing getting in the way of making this game immersive. Again, just like in RE2, the lights are on. This mansion is better lit than Snoop Dogg's Christmas tree. You, dear viewer, look at this game and tell me if it looks like a horror game to you. Let me answer that for you. No, it doesn't. It looks like Barbie's dream house before the color pink was invented. There are two crucial elements to making a spooky mansion. 1. A mansion. 2. Fucking darkness. The remake had the lights on, and that game looks spooky as a Klansman. The lights aren't the problem, it's that everything is way too bright. Just look at the main hall. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to light a room that big, that well, and we're supposed to believe it's being done with candlelight? So, yeah, overall the game's not got much going in ways of immersion. If you're coming at this game having played the remake, you'll probably be surprised by how much smaller the mansion is here. A lot of the paths and rooms were not a part of the original, which makes it feel pretty bare bones by comparison. Another thing this mansion has less of than the remake is windows. It's an odd detail, but this huge mansion has almost no windows. Not a problem, just kinda bizarre. Okay, anyway, the game's not very immersive, not very scary, but how's the story? It feels like a stretch to call it a story. Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield's harrowing night at the Spencer estate is incredibly basic. There's a beginning, a game, and an end. Your only driving force is to escape the mansion. There's no antagonist or damsel, just people saying dumb shit to each other. So in that case, how's the acting?
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You have no idea how excited I've been to talk about this. Resident Evil 1 has without a doubt the most infamous video game acting of all time.
Stop it! Don't open that door!
It's not even necessarily the worst, but nevertheless, this game is the poster boy for bad video game acting. When people paraded about The Last of Us saying video game acting is good now, they were thinking in comparison of a Resident Evil 1.
Chris? Stop it.
Wesker, you're pitiful.
Before I go any further, let me just say this. Bless these actors, okay? Fucking bless them. Everyone harps on them, and I'm about to, but they never stood a chance. The writing is dog shit, the polygonal characters are cartoonishly emoting like 30 feet from the camera, there's abnormally long pauses between every sentence, and this is a brand new IP that no one knows is going to be as important as it is. You might have well as shot them in the foot, then told them to tap dance. It's completely unfair, but it's also really funny.
Jill, here's my radio. You should keep it.
No! Richard!
So what do these actors do that makes their performances so funny and so awful? Oddly enough, it's because they're trying. Way too fucking hard. I've seen more subtle performances in parody films, and that's the thing, it doesn't feel like you're watching a scary movie, it feels like you're watching Scary Movie the movie, except this time it's not meant to be funny, which somehow makes it funnier.
There are terrible demons. Ouch!
Everyone here has dialed their performance up to 11. Everyone except the woman playing Jill. She's dialed her performance up to 101. When Jill is suspicious of someone, Jill is really suspicious of that someone.
That's what I was going to say.
When Jill is relieved, Jill is really relieved.
Oh, Chris, you're alive!
When Jill despairs, Jill really despairs.
Oh no, you
When Jill is grateful, Jill is really grateful.
You saved me!
Yeah.
That was close. Thanks, Barry.
If Jill is in pain, Jill is really in pain.
Am I poisoned? Give me the serum.
If Jill does a coarse whisper, Jill does a really coarse whisper.
Brad? Brad!
It's all just so delightfully terrible. Of course, none of that's helped by the completely off-the-wall stuff these people have to say.
It's a weapon. It's really powerful, especially against living things.
It really is some of the most remarkable storytelling I've ever seen. Everyone's dedication to being so over the top creates such a bizarre contrast to the intended tone, and the result is a level of comedy that parody writers wish they could achieve.
Yeah.
At least for the most part, the game does not use CGI cutscenes, which was definitely for the best, because when they do, it looks like the Muppets had an emo phase. Instead, the game's intro and end scene were filmed in live action with lookalikes, who I'm willing to bet also did the voice acting. These cutscenes are nothing special, there clearly wasn't much of a budget and they're about as laughable as everything else in this game. But honestly, I think they're fun, and I'd much rather they continued to do the live action cutscenes for the later games too. Though it is odd that they filmed the final cutscene with Chris as the focus, regardless of who you played as. If you played as Jill, it actually looks kinda sinister. Oh good, she's safe now. Or is she? Other than that, all the cutscenes are done in-engine with these blocky character models emoting like they're on Broadway. Speaking of the character models, is it just me, or is Jill carrying a lot of inventory in the polygonal wagon? Seriously, she looks ridiculous. Remember that joke about how Trump stands like a centaur with its back half cut off? Yeah, I think this is an attempt to give the game some sex appeal, which I know doesn't look likely, but remember, people used to find this game scary, so hell, maybe this used to look a lot better. Speaking of polygonal sex appeal, I've got a little fact here that I found very interesting. Lara Croft and Jill Valentine. They're both women from the early years of video games who always wear blue, but Lara is by far the most famous, often seen as the symbol of women in video games. Now, here's the fact. Resident Evil 1 and Tomb Raider 1, both released in 1996, Resident Evil in March and Tomb Raider in October. This means that Jill actually predates Lara by 6 months. I'm just saying, maybe if Jill was more gymnastic, things would be different. One final gripe I have with the narrative is the ending. I'm pretty sure this game has at least a few different endings because the remake did, and in my playthrough, Barry died, and that's definitely not canon. But what the fuck did I do to not get a final boss fight? I grabbed my best weapons, saved my game, then I sent up a flare to attract the chopper, and the game just fucking ended. Was that fight with Tyrant supposed to be the grand finale? Because he only took 3 grenade rounds, while Yorn, a mid-game boss, took 9. It was just very anticlimactic, and it annoyed me because it meant I saved one more time than I needed to. So, the game's got a poorly told narrative, an unimpressive environment, and janky gameplay. It's understandable that you may be struggling to see how this game launched not only a franchise, but the survival horror genre.
Hey, don't, alright? Just don't. If you go into the comments and you say,
Actually, Alone in the Dark was the first survival horror game I had.
I will fucking find you, okay? And I'm gonna hurt you. I will plunge you into the deepest depths of hell, and I will leave you there for a lifetime. Then I'm gonna pull you back out. Only for a couple of minutes, just long enough for you to realize how nice it is here. How nice it could have been if you didn't say that stupid shit. Then I'm gonna plunge you back down because it's what you deserve, you despicable motherfucker. Please like and subscribe.
But yeah, none of this really screams the birth of video game horror, so what gives? The soundtrack. RE1's soundtrack is the game's saving grace, because it's the only thing here reminding you that this is supposed to be a horror game. It's not the best Resi soundtrack, especially considering the remake has the entire soundtrack remade with better quality, but it's still damn good. That eerie droning when you enter the main hall is pivotal to making you fear the Spencer Mansion. The backdrop on its own isn't doing anything, but the second you hear that score, you'll know this place has some skeletons in its closets, and you don't want to meet them. It doesn't matter how shit the game looks, the second you enter that basement, you want to get out of there as soon as possible because of the score. It's aggressive, contorting, and not dissimilar to nails on a chalkboard. When you hear it, you're gonna panic, and you're gonna do whatever you have to until it stops. It's amazing. The game is full of these ominous, haunting tracks, and the best of them is the safe room theme. Safe Haven was always one of my favorites, ever since I first heard it in the remake. And what I anticipated most about this game was getting to hear its predecessor. God, man, I love it. I don't know, there's something cool about knowing that Resident Evil soundtracks have just always been amazing. And with that, I think we're done. I have just looked back and reviewed every original Resident Evil game. So, what's the verdict? Are these must-play classics? No, they're not. If you're a new age Resi fan like me, I doubt you'll find much exciting about these games to justify the effort. But if you really want to play at least one of these games, play free. RE3 Nemesis is definitely the best of these games. It played the best, it looked the best, and unlike the other two, it does not have a superior version. That said, I don't really know how you get it. I assume it's on PC, but I'm pretty sure it's not on the modern consoles. If you have the option, I really recommend the Trilogy bundle on the PS3, which is what you've been seeing here. To my understanding, it's a pretty good port. Everything ran well, there were no noticeable compromises, and it's considerably cheaper than the alternatives. I was overall pretty negative on these games, which I already know is going to get me some mean, poorly thought out comments. But please understand, that was only a negative because I'm reviewing them from modern standards. I had to, it's all I know. But by their own standards, these games are phenomenal for their age. Have you ever tried to play GTA San Andreas? That game is both younger and considerably more popular than these games, and it plays about 5 times worse. It's all about perspective. I am wrapping up here, I swear, but I've just got to address that this isn't actually all the original Resi games. There have been 4 remakes, including RE4, which makes Resident Evil 4 2005 an original Resident Evil game. I didn't want to include that game here because it's so wildly different to the others that I figured it'd be like putting a nun in a brothel. But also because I already made a video covering that game extensively, and it was sort of my first successful video. A lot of people liked it, so naturally I didn't make another Resident Evil video for over a year, which I feel kinda guilty about. So to make it up to you guys, I'm gonna let you choose what game the next Resi video will be about. The options are Remake and 7, but if you think it should be something different, let me know. This will be a poll that you can find on the community section of the channel. So yeah, that's it. I'm done. If you made it this far, thank you. Seriously, that means the world to me. Bye.